Welcome to Wichita's Biz That Is on KGPT. And today we have a friend, Jim Dunning, from Dunning & Associates. That's a pretty well-known accounting firm within Wichita. And I'm going to start off kind of strangely for you.
Okay. All right.
With Monty Python, they used to do a lot of chartered accountant jokes. And you know why?
No.
Well, because their families, several of them, had been accountants. And a couple of those guys, when they went to college, that was what they intended to major in.
Okay.
So my question to you is, when did you decide and how did you get to that particular occupation?
I was already in college. I was going to actually coach and teach because I was pursuing a baseball career at that point, and thought coaching and teaching would be a good way to go. And I had a professor, bless his heart, he asked me in an education class, if you were a teacher, would you send your children to a teacher like you? And I said, no. And he thought that was a rather strange answer, and I'm a pretty brutally honest guy. And he said, why not? And I said, you know, I'm really here just to coach. I don't really care about teaching. I was studying history, and not that I'm a big history buff, but I knew that once I got going, my lessons plans wouldn't change, you know, because history's fixed. And I'd had those coaches that were history teachers, and so he made the comment, I would suggest that maybe you find something else to do. And so I began looking, and that was in 1980, and that was the year my father went out on his own. He's a CPA. He began his career in Wichita with Cubic & Company.
Oh, yeah.
And then
Fred.
In the early 70s, he went to Wichita State as the budget director. In January 1, 1980, he went out on his own. And I thought, well, if I was 40-something and could be my own boss, that'd be all right. I could go for that. Had no idea what he did all these years. I just knew that he paid the bills, and I appreciated that very much. So
that's the usual case with kids.
Yes, yeah. You know, I went to school, and he got smarter, and so I began exploring and looking into what this accounting thing was, and it just kind of clicked, and never really envisioned that we'd end up working together. And initially on my graduation, we didn't. We got married and moved to Hutchinson and worked for Farmarco, the grain marketing side of farmland industries at that point. So
interesting.
So I didn't grow up wanting to be an accountant.
So what got you then from Hutch back to here? How'd that work?
I went to a smaller company in Hutchinson with the idea of maybe buying in and becoming a part owner. And they sold out to now Westlake's Hardware. And they were very gracious, a good company. They kept me on, and I told them I wanted to stay in accounting. I wanted to use my degree. And so one day I was at their North store, which had a small sporting goods department, and was trying to sell my former boss at Farmarco a set of golf clubs. And he asked what I was doing, and I told him the story, and he said, we have an opening if you'd like to come back. So good lesson to not burn bridges.
Yes.
And so it was a different position than I had right out of school, but I went back to Farmarco. 9 months later, they sold out to Union Equity. And so I called my father, this was in 1985, and told him, this is going to hit the news, tell Mom not to worry, it'll be fine. And he called me back the next day and said, you kind of caught me off guard, but I promised your mother I would get help before next tax season. And so I said, well, send me an application, and you know, we bantered back and forth a little bit, but Farmarco was very gracious. They laid me off on June 1st, and on June 2nd of 1985, I began working with my father. And here we are 30 years later.
Wow.
So,
what were the big surprises as you got into business, and over time you really have taken the responsibility for the management, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Part of his retirement plan, he turned the operations over in 2001. Because in 2000 he turned 65, and there were different Social Security rules then than there were now, and that was the year they changed them, but that was his plan, and so we moved forward. And you know, one of the big things I remembered going into accounting, one of my first clients happened to be a dentist, and they wanted to come in and visit about their financial statements because they were having some issues and some challenges. And I looked at those numbers, and I saw what the dentist was making compared to what I was making. And I thought, how in the world can you have problems? But I came to realize, we tend to spend what we have, and some of his challenges were certainly business, not just financial. So there are a lot of similarities in business, from contracting to being a dentist to veterinarians to other professionals. The tax issues, the employee issues, those kinds of things. You can change the label on the outside of the building, but a lot of the issues are very similar. So.
But you're in a field where things change all the time.
Yes.
All the time.
Yes.
You don't just have the technological changes and that stuff, but you have somebody going, gee, I think it'd be a good idea to, and then suddenly all kinds of new, and in fact, as we speak,
yes,
those things are going on in Topeka.
In Topeka, yes.
So how is that? I mean, how do you deal with it?
It's challenging. I mean, we're required to have 40 hours a year of continuing education, which with all those things going on isn't hard to do. Right. And so we watch things as they come out of Topeka. We read the paper a little bit. I don't get too excited about it until it actually passes and gets somebody's signatures, because it can change so many times. And then the real meat and potatoes of what's happened actually comes about a year later, after it's been in play and you see what actually happens. Last year was an example in Kansas where, or I guess a couple years ago, where the governor tweaked the tax plan. Mm-hmm. And we saw a few changes like that.
Where some people went to become LLCs.
Right, but it wasn't quite as cut and dry as I originally thought it was going to be, depending on where you were with your own payroll and some of those kinds of things.
Plus the federal taxes are so much greater.
Yes, those are the big deciding factors. Mm-hmm. And so we depend a lot on other organizations. There's the AICPA certainly is an organization we belong to. RootWorks is another organization that they are practicing accountants, and we share ideas amongst each other. And then we have grown to a point now we bring a guy in at the end of the year that will do continuing ed for all of our tax folks. And that's nice, because then we can share specific client challenges and questions, because it's just our firm. We're not in a big room of 100 other CPAs where confidentiality becomes
okay. We're going to stop right there, take a break, and we'll be back in just a minute with more of Jim Dunning on Wichita's Biz That Is. Welcome back to Wichita's Biz That Is with our guest today, Jim Dunning. I'm glad to have you here, Jim.
Thanks, good to be here.
We were talking about the tax changes and all that. Did you want to finish any more on that, or?
No, it's just, continuing ed is certainly an important piece. The internet and email and those blurbs that we get. And then certainly, I know you're not looking for a plug, but our association through WIBA and they have lobbyists in Topeka, which happen to be the same ones that the Kansas Society of CPAs use, and
that helps.
And so we pay attention to them as well to see what's coming down the pike.
Okay. Is there an advantage for these big companies where they can have people who've got different pieces of tax? Is that an advantage to them? Has that changed because there's so much complexity in the tax code anymore?
There are pros and cons. There are times we talk about that in our firm. Some of the bigger firms in town, public accounting, they specialize, and they will have a sales tax department, or they will have a state income tax department, or a payroll tax department. And certainly there's an advantage to that, and people that are in multiple states and have those challenges, that's a great source for them. And they're also very open to working with smaller firms if we need help in a certain area. I do enjoy having knowledge in all of those areas, because I think I don't really like the term small business, because it's not small to the owner, but independent business, where they're dealing with a little bit of all of those, so to have some knowledge about sales tax and how that works, and payroll taxes, as well as income taxes, I think can be an advantage also. We're not just focused on one area.
Well, to be fair, they also then also carry some heavier overhead, et cetera.
They do have larger overhead than we do, indeed. So,
but I've talked to lawyers, and it's a similar situation there where, you know, I know somebody who probably knows more state law than anybody in 5 states.
yes, yes.
But that's what they know.
Exactly, exactly. And we get asked for referrals, and those are the kinds of things that we look at too. What, you know, what's your question, or what is it we're trying to accomplish? And then, you know, whether it's financial advisors or lawyers or whomever, then we try to find somebody that's working in that area.
What's changed the most since you went into it? 1980, you said.
85.
85, sorry.
That's
What is different today?
technology, without question. I marvel at my father, who is 79 now, you know, and didn't have electricity and things like that when he grew up. And I made the comment, he is still working and still doing tax and uses the computer and those kinds of things. And I made the comment to him that, you know, I'll never see the changes that you saw. And he's like, you already have, you just don't realize it. Because when we started, I was still doing returns by hand, and we still typed some of them. There were no laser printers. Fax machines were relatively new. And then last year in 14, we moved to, we created our own cloud, if you will. I mean, it's housed inside, but so that we can have a little more flexible schedules for some of our staff and things, then we created our own cloud so they can work from home if they have young kids or need to log in from other locations. So I don't know that it's slowed down any, but man, you know, from typing tax returns and making copies to now we don't even print copies out. In many cases, we can offer your copy to you on a portal that you can log in from anywhere, and you have your digital copy. Then the e-filing is cut down on that, and we store ours in a PDF file cabinet that's on our server. So we have many clients that never hit paper.
Yeah, well, I was in budgeting, which has some similarities to that, because I can remember in Chicago, I mean, a batch that thick with the budget at 3 in the morning.
Yes.
And there's an error.
Yes.
You know, when you're online, that's not a big deal.
No, it's.
But at 3 in the morning, it is a real pain.
Yes, absolutely.
As people look at this as a profession, what kind of advice would you give somebody? Somebody's, you know, coming out of high school or they're in college and they're thinking about it. What would you say to them? I
think it's awesome. It gives you a good base and a good background in business that you can use. You certainly don't have to go into public accounting. You know, you could.
Why don't we stop and explain what that means? People hear that term, but what does that mean?
Public accounting?
Yes.
CPAs, certified public accountants, we pass a test, and then we maintain our certification through the Kansas State Board of Accountancy.
Right.
And as a CPA, we can issue opinions on financial statements and that nobody else is entitled to do that. You'll see some that do, but you know, technically a CPA are the only ones that can issue an audit opinion.
Right.
And so there's a professional standard and a certain expectation of quality and knowledge that you get with a CPA. Public accounting is just that. We serve the public. Now we have created some niches and some special areas that we tend to focus on more than others, and we don't audit.
Well, we'll come back and we'll talk about those niches in a moment on more of Wichita's Biz That Is. Welcome back to Wichita's Biz That Is, and my guest today, Jim Dunning. I'm Tim Witzman with Wichita Independent Business Association. And Jim was talking about CPA. Go ahead and conclude any of that, and then we'll get into that niche question that you brought up.
Well, and like I say, public accounting, you know, we serve the public and work with the public, and we provide, you know, financial statements, payroll reports, sales tax, pretty much anything that the general public might need, as opposed, when I first came out of school, I was in corporate accounting, and I had my responsibilities within the finance department. Initially, it was financial statements, and so I made sure that we had all the information in, and I got it plugged in, and I was ready to move on up the chain with the financials, where this is a little more broad-based and depends on what businesses you're working with.
Well, I can tell you how useful accountants can be. When I was in Chicago, we had some folks who were very good and very helpful because we had some challenges and I had to clean some things up.
Sure.
And here I worked with Mark Dick, you may know Mark, on public, and he was really good at that as we were changing accounting system and a lot of other things.
Yes.
So I have always had a pretty good relationship with accountants. I found them very helpful.
I smiled that when you say that. Saw a T-shirt, came across the other day that I'm an accountant. I help you solve problems you didn't even know you had.
Yeah.
So, but,
in some cases, that has been true.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, I was going to ask that because I know that when people have this image, it's okay, they handle my accounting and they prepare a financial statement, but you do other things too. You have some niches that you've worked on.
We do. We have adopted some programs and some procedures that we use so we can actually become an outsourced accounting department or an outsourced CFO, as the case may be. And we've done that for some doctors groups and then a large client here in town. And I mentioned that technology is one of the big changes that we've seen, and we're capitalizing and utilizing that technology that we're doing the payables for this one particular group. And so it comes into their office and they scan it in and upload it. We code it and break it down for their accounting system. And then the owner gets to see, he gets notified that there's a bill out there for you to approve. And then he can actually see an image of that invoice, so he can approve it or not, if there's a challenge. And then depending on how it's set up, then we may go ahead and pay that bill, or he may also be doing the approval process or the actual payment of that. And it's all done online. Your vendor gets a check, it says it's from you, and has a little image, a reduced image of that invoice, so they know what they're paying. We have several clients that we provide payroll services for. We find that we have backup.
Hello.
Yeah, WIBA is one of those. But the nice thing there is we're there and we have backup systems in place, so if somebody's on vacation or if somebody's sick, that doesn't stop the process. Somebody else will pick it up and run with it. So you don't have to worry about having your payroll done on time or having bills processed and things like that. So,
what do you see as the future? What's coming? Because you obviously think about that. You have to figure out how am I going to stay relevant in this business.
Definitely. I have a young client that kind of helped awaken me to that fact. Their tax situation is one that they could go back through and they needed to look for some things through their checkbook. And I wasn't sure they were watching, but he was actually taking notes on his phone. And I said, well, go back through your check register. And they said, we don't write checks. And I tried to keep my chin from hitting the desk, but it's like, so how do you keep track? Well, they just log in. And I had a similar discussion with a banker who had 3 sons and insisted that they all learn how to reconcile their accounts and do those things. And his youngest was kind of holding out, and they finally got into a discussion, and he said, Dad, I'm real time. I use a debit card. I don't write checks. I can log into the bank. I can see exactly where I'm at that moment, where you're 30 days late. And so I'm finding that, that's our next generation of business owners. Those are our next tax clients. And in many cases, they don't want to take time out of their day to make an appointment and come in and sit down and talk to you.
Yep.
So the electronic communications, the electronic transfer of information and things like that, I think we've got some pretty good base systems in place. But they're going to continue to evolve and improve even as we go. But that's where I see that we're headed. And I could be a tech junkie if I allowed myself to be, but I wouldn't be very good at it, so we hired that done. But those are some of the changes and challenges that I see headed our way, and how are we going to connect with those people and stay in touch with that future business owner.
What do you think are the biggest misconceptions? Every business has misconceptions, whether you're a plumber or a lawyer.
Well, for me, one of the biggest compliments that I hear is, "You're not a typical accountant," to which I say thank you. I think many are viewed as having no personality, really don't want to deal with people, just leave me in the corner and let me crunch numbers.
Yeah, what was the definition of an actuary, an accountant without a personality?
Something like
something
that.
Like
yeah,
that.
Exactly. But for our firm anyway, I think that's people are pleasantly surprised to find out that we really are people and do more than just crunch numbers. And
well, my observation has been always that the people who were in management and accounting were really sharp in the sense that they knew a lot of stuff. They were people who knew a lot of what was going on in the community, plus they knew a lot about their business.
Well, and we were talking about education a minute ago and encouraging young people to get into that. And that's why I say you don't have to go into public accounting. You can find a corporation you like to work with. Mm-hmm. I have several business owners that have a business background, and they may be in retail or various flower shops or whatever, but that business background and that accounting, that base knowledge, I think can go lots of different directions.
Well, we started with a little bit of semi-humor about mm-hmm. Monty Python. Through the years, some very funny things must have happened. I know you have to be careful because some of them are clients, you can't say things, but every business has its own shop talk. Mm-hmm. I once drove a cab in Indianapolis, and then late at night I would run across the working girls having coffee with us. Their shop talk was very interesting.
I can imagine.
But how about one from accounting?
The first one that jumped out at me, a really strange experience, was a client that had called in, and we were doing taxes for this client, and her husband had just died, and I mean literally just died, and she was concerned about getting the paperwork in. The family's coming in, and he had arranged all the paperwork and everything, and she was very concerned about losing that. And she came in, and her sister came with her, and she was obviously still in shock. But I just thought it was really strange that, when tragedy struck, my CPA is not the first person that I would call. I'd be calling the doctor, I'd be calling my minister, I would be, something like that. But for some reason, it was just important for her to get those papers out of the house. And so we handled it as graciously as we could.
Well, they're going to get us out of the house if I don't close this up.
Very good.
But thank you for that one, Jim.
Thanks for
having me.
It was a pleasure.
And we'll see you again on Wichita's Biz That Is.